Fala aí, galera, sejam todos muito bem-vindos a essa live mega especial, uma live internacional com o Dr. PhD em História, Richard Carey. É uma honra, um prazer inenarrável para mim, para o Pedro, para o Scani, para todos vocês receber essa grande autoridade no tema do Jesus histórico, dos mitos e das culturas antigas. Então, para mim, é um prazer que eu não sei descrever para vocês a minha felicidade de recebê-lo aqui e a gente poder ter a oportunidade dessa entrevista. Então, Pedro, fique à vontade para apresentar o Dr. Carey para o público. Faça as honras aí, meu querido.
All right, Doc. As you said, I'm going to call you Rick and Dr. Carey. I like Dr. Carey.
You can call me Dr. Carrier if you like. Yeah, that's fine.
Well, first of all, welcome to Brazil.
Yeah.
So I believe it's your first time doing an interview for Brazilian audience.
Yeah, I'm quite certain. And it's good finally to have done this because I have Kindle, like my books sell on Kindle Brazil. And so I get the royalty statement, so I can see how often people in Brazil are buying my Kindle books. And so I keep seeing, oh, look, there's a lot of interest in Brazil. And so I was like, well, I guess I should do a show.
All right. Ele acabou de falar que ele tem um Kindle e ele consegue avaliar as compras, como é que faz. E ele avaliou que o Brasil tem interesse realmente. Os brasileiros são bastante interessados nas obras dele. Então, muito obrigado por me receber aqui e vamos nessa. All right, so we're going to move on to the first question. Antonio gonna say it out loud first in Portuguese, and then I'll give it to you in English. Pode fazer a pergunta, Antônio.
A primeira pergunta dos tópicos que nós vamos trabalhar aqui é a seguinte. Muitos apologistas do Jesus histórico alegam que existe um consenso na academia, de que de fato Jesus existiu. E, Pedro, pode até acrescentar aí que quem nega isso seria um terraplanista, né? São ofendidos aqui, sofrem ad hominem, né? Dizem não haver historiadores ou pesquisadores sérios, como o Dr. Carey, né? Que defendam e investiguem a ideia do Jesus mito. Isso realmente procede? Existem historiadores e pesquisadores com peso curricular, como o do Dr. Carey, que levam a sério a hipótese da não existência do personagem Jesus? Existe um debate ou não na academia? Quanto a essa questão, existe esse debate ou não?
All right, Dr. Carey. Many apologists of the historical Jesus claim that there's an academic consensus that indeed Jesus existed. They say that there's no serious historian or researchers like yourself and who advocate and investigate the idea of Jesus myth. Actually, they pretty much come with ad hominem about, like, all right, if you don't believe that, you're a flat earther or something like that. So
right, yeah,
you really deny it. Is this true? Like, there's no historian, like researchers, as a historian like your stature, like there's some seriously take that seriously hypothesis about the non-existence of Jesus? Is that an open debate in academia?
You know, it is actually. There are a lot of, obviously there's a lot of pressure to want the debate to go away or to ignore it or pretend it isn't there. But the debate is actually happening. I mean, we have already 2 peer-reviewed monographs. In fact, the only ones that deal with the historicity of Jesus as a specific question find doubt as the result. And there's been no countermanding study yet. The last time there was a study that specifically on historicity that argued for historicity was 100 years ago. What usually happens is people just assume historicity and then build their theories of the historical Jesus on top of that. But I actually just quickly went on the web to see what the count is at. I have a list. It's called the List of Historians Who Take Mythicism Seriously. And there are some very significant figures in there, as well as people definitely as qualified as me or more. And the number now is somewhere around 44. So 44. So that's 44 experts. These are people with relevant PhDs. Many of them are like notable professors, whether retired or still teaching. And roughly a third of them, I would say, are actual doubters. Like they actually agree that it's that 50-50 at best that there was a historical Jesus. And the others on the list, the others of the 44, agree that it's something that needs to be discussed, and it is a thing. It is a legitimate thing to question the historicity of Jesus, even if they themselves stick with the idea that there was a historical Jesus.
Ok. Então ele disse que ele tem uma lista de 44 especialistas e researchers e pesquisadores que levam realmente a sério. You said that there is an open debate on that in academia?
Yeah, it exists, but a lot of people want to deny it or hide it, right? So
Existe um debate, mas muita gente quer negar que existe. Mas ele existe na academia. Esse debate está em aberto. Não é uma questão que está fechado. When you said that the last research was something 100 years ago about the historicity of the Jesus, you said?
Yeah, about 100 years ago-ish, Shirley Jackson Case was the name of the professor, and he wrote the book Defending the Historicity of Jesus. There hasn't been a book since. There's been books about the historical Jesus, but there's not been any books that specifically examine the detailed question of should we even assume he existed in the first place. And that was the last one other than mine. And then mine came out 100 years later, and now Raphael Lataster, a few years after that, came out with his book published under Brill. And all of this information people can find. I don't know. Is it possible for me to share my screen? I don't know.
É possível ele compartilhar a tela?
Share screen.
Ele vai ali em apresentar, né? Não sei como é que tá em inglês.
Yeah, you can go to, let me see here. Presentation, something like that.
Yeah, I'm walking through it now.
Yeah.
Is it showing? Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
So that's the article I was just talking about. And if you go down, you'll see I have the list of these are all the historians, real historians in the field, who agree that this is a debate in the field, right? So the idea that no serious historians take this seriously, no, there's over 40 of them. And the first ones, up to about 13, where am I at? I can't remember where it stops, but about a third of them are up to here, about 17. So about 17 of them are doubters. Like me, they don't think that we can know if there was a historical Jesus. And then the others just agree that this is a debate worth having and that it shouldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. And you can go and I have the quotations, so you can actually see them say this or hear them read them say this. I have their qualifications linked so people can't question their qualifications. So that's, and you can see it goes all the way.
All right, let me translate that for them. O que ele falou foi que dos 44 pesquisadores que ele tem listado aí, 17 de fato falam que não existe, né, apresenta evidências. E a última obra séria que foi apresentado de uma possível existência de Jesus data de 100 anos atrás.
Uau.
Então, é um debate que está em aberto, não está decidido na academia. Isso é uma coisa que ele falou que dos 17, e o resto desses outros 44 assumem que não sabemos. Dos 17 falam que não tem, e os outros do resto dos 44 falam que não sabemos que tem um debate. Então, que não sabemos que se tem ou não. Então, o último estudo de 100 anos atrás, isso mostra que isso não é verdade.
Tem como acrescentar se, por exemplo, assim, muitos que defendem Jesus histórico na academia são pastores, padres ou pessoas com algum tipo de viés?
Yeah, Antonio got a good question for you. Adding to that theme, do you think that those who advocate for the historical Jesus, would you say that how many of them are priests or fathers or like biased? I'm saying that's how many of them researchers are really biased on that.
This is interesting one because this gets back before we recorded. We were talking about David Fitzgerald and his book, but he came out with Jesus Mything in Action, which is a 2-volume set. And the first volume, he actually describes a study that he ran. He got a bunch of volunteers and he ran a study to actually try and answer that question, like research this. And I think his statistic was something like 2 out of 3 or something like that, right? So it's very high percentage. And then 1 out of 3 teach at schools that forbid them to question, right? Like literally it's in their contract that they're not even allowed to doubt the historicity of Jesus.
Wow.
So, right. So, yeah, right. Exactly. And
let me give that out for them before, because I want you to continue, but let me give that.
Yeah.
That's really important.
You bet.
Ele falou que o David Gritzel, Gritzel, que ele falou desse livro, Nailed It, ele falou que da lista dos todos os researchers e tudo mais, coisa de 2 a 3 que são pesquisadores são também religiosos. De 3, 2 são. Então a maioria deles são. E no contrato deles, you said on the contract.
1 in 3. So about 1 in 3 teach at a school that forbids them to doubt. So they're not even allowed to. Yeah.
Então ele falou que de 1 a 3 não são nem eles são livres de ser perguntados sobre isso, não querem nem falar sobre isso porque eles não cabe a eles falar sobre isso porque é como se isso por contrato, ele é um professor na universidade e por contrato ele se resguarda de não falar sobre esse assunto. Porque então a maioria deles são religiosos e a maioria
It's new for me. Interesting.
Yeah, yes. David Fitzgerald, you want to have him and you want to ask him this because he's the one who did the study and he has a lot of anecdotes to tell about this. So yeah,
anecdotes. I like that.
It is a relevant issue, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Acrescenta para ele, Pedro.
Ele falou que o David é um cara que, quando a gente trazer aqui, perguntar isso para ele, que ele vai dar exatamente a quantidade e como que a maioria desses researchers são enviesados, são pastores, são padres.
Aqui no Brasil, a maioria dos historiadores que defendem Jesus histórico, eles usam as obras de padres, pastores, que já têm um certo viés para defender essa hipótese, né?
In Brazil, the majority of the researchers, they use works from priests, from fathers.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really biased. It's a thing that consensus. It's something that that's my crew. And guys, everybody here, we agree with that, right? So they pretty much just go by that. You want to add something?
Yeah, it's interesting. The more you guys speak, the more there's so many cognate words between Portuguese and the languages that I do know. I can sometimes catch the gist of what you're saying. I don't know the grammar, but it's I knew what Antonio said, right? So I'm not surprised at all, right?
Ele não tá surpreso.
But imagine,
ele falou que ele...
imagine if we had, it was Hercules studies, and we had like 2/3 of the professors who were writing papers on this and judging, peer reviewing papers on this, and controlling the grants and all of that were hardcore Hercules believers, and so no one could it would be really hard to doubt Hercules. Like they'd be like, no one takes that seriously that there wasn't a Hercules. Of course he existed. It's that kind of thing, and you can actually build analogies. I know, like one of the other questions you might ask later. I'll bring this up again, but that's you got to think about it in those terms, right? Like, what if we don't have another field like this? Like, there's not in history, right? There's no. I mean, maybe Islamic history, and you have Islamic scholars. Like that would be like the closest thing. Like so, questioning anything about Muhammad or the origins of Islam might be verboten, but that's just illustrates the point, right?
Yeah. They discuss about the historical Muhammad or something like that? Ele falou que ele não sabe qual outro campo. Esse é um campo bem específico. Qual outro campo que as pessoas justamente têm esse debate tão aberto, que é a questão do Jesus histórico. Eu não sei se outras religiões têm isso, porque é uma questão que não está decidida. Então, ele falou, ele até falou da questão da pergunta que a gente vai fazer sobre Hércules, e a questão de como que tinha defensores de Hércules, que claro que ele existiu, como que não? E isso é enviesado, isso não surpreende ele em nada.
Exato. Vamos para a próxima pergunta.
All right, so we're going to move on to the question number 2.
Scania, meu querido.
So Scania going to say that for you. And it's a really deep voice. You're going to like that.
Então a gente vê que esse consenso aí é uma estratégia argumentativa. Então esse consenso não está estabelecido, né? Então essa fala do Carey aí é muito importante, né? Porque o maior argumento utilizado para combater o miticismo é o consenso, ou seja, nenhum consenso existe.
What's kind of saying is even the consensus existed, because that's the main card that they use to defend the historical Jesus about the academic consensus. But even that exists. So it's all myth. Even the consensus is a myth. So
all right. Yeah.
So it's gonna say it out the question number 2. Go ahead. Pode ir.
Okay. Vamos lá. Quais critérios e metodologias você usa para dizer que um determinado elemento da narrativa é mitológico ou histórico? Quais são os problemas dos critérios como múltipla atestação dos evangelhos, constrangimento, o caso da cruz, e descontinuidade, que é o rompimento com as tradições judaicas? Esses critérios que são usados pelos crentes no Jesus histórico para comentar que a narrativa é verdadeira, eles têm força probatória ou são mais artifícios argumentativos que pegam bem aos ouvidos do público leigo?
Yeah, so question number 2 is, what criteria and methodologies do you use to determine whether a specific narrative, element of narrative, is mythological or historical? Like, in this sense, what are the differences that the criteria, the methodologies that you used, and for those who advocate for the historical Jesus used? Like, what's the difference between you and them? And are these criteria has issues such as multiple gospel accounts, embarrassment, like the cross, like the crucifixion, and clearly the discontinuity with like breaking the Jewish tradition? These criteria carry evidential weight, or they're more like devices for the sound good to the lay audiences?
Yeah, I just brought this up. I'm going to share again.
All right. Yeah, please.
This is that is Amazon Brazil. I have no idea what the money is, so
it's real. It's called real.
Yeah. I don't know if those are high prices or low prices or anything.
No, it's a really low price. Compared to the dollar, it's really low price.
Okay. Yeah. But this is the book, right? So when I got the research grant to do the postdoc research on this question, the first thing I had to settle was method. This very question, right? Like, how do we answer these questions? Are the methods any good? And so I wrote this book. This was the first product of it. It's another peer-reviewed monograph, but it's just on the methodology. And what I found is I studied to see, like, you asked the question of the argument from embarrassment and the argument from dissimilarity and the things that you asked there. Mm-hmm. So I researched that, and I found that every study done on the methods says that they're bad. Like, all of them. And I cite them and quote these scholars that say this. Like, all the studies found that these are very flawed methods and we should stop using them. And so what I did is I pointed that out and I explained logically why. And then I developed a different method, which it's a mathematical method, but it's really just a logic. And that's what's in this book. And I don't know if I want to translate.
So pretty much you use the logic to break their argument.
Well, yeah, it's Bayes' theorem, which I don't know how that translates into Portuguese, but it's basically this idea of prior odds times likelihood ratio equals final odds. And so you ask questions of how likely is the evidence on a particular theory, and compare that to how likely is that same evidence on a different theory. And then the difference between those tells you which one is more likely than the other. When you conjoin it with prior probability, like what is usually the case and so on. So there's a way to do this that actually undergirds all of these methodologies, even the ones when the argument from embarrassment works, which is rare. Even when it works, it's using this same underlying machinery. So what I say is, let's get rid of these sort of bogus criteria and just use the machinery by itself. And because that exposes all of our premises to criticism and examination.
Uhum. Esse livro ele escreveu justamente para responder exatamente essa pergunta que fizemos. É um livro que ele criou um teorema. By the way, theorem is teorema in Portuguese. So.
Of course it is, yeah. Yeah, right.
So, ele criou esse livro que é baseado, que ele quis encontrar, beleza, vou pesquisar o que os historiadores usam para defender. E ele encontrou que todos são pueril. E ele escreveu esse livro, tem um teorema de todos, como que eles utilizam e como que eles são pueris. E ele apresenta um método mais eficaz que poderia usar até mesmo para o lado deles, mas não funciona porque, obviamente, é um mito. Então, you said you said that you mentioned, I forgot the question, but you said on the theorem that their arguments, it's pretty much
it's
fallacies or
yeah, this theorem can explain why their arguments work when they work, and it can also explain why their arguments don't work when they don't work. Right?
Nesse livro ele explica como que o argumento deles funcionam e quando funcionam, como que funciona, e o porquê que também, quando não funciona e por que não funciona. Então, nesse livro é completo porque ele consegue mostrar a metodologia dos dois lados. You said that some arguments works. Can you give some examples?
That work. Yeah. So embarrassment. The most popular one actually is not the crucifixion. It's the baptism by John, right? Several scholars of note have actually criticized this. It's a bad argument. So what you see, for example, is the Gospel of John, which we know is the later gospel. It's the last gospel written. It erases it. It gets rid of it. So the argument is that, well, John appears to be, and we know he used the other gospels, so we know he knows about it, right? So he has John the Baptist, but he doesn't have him baptize Jesus. And so the argument is that makes more sense. Like, that's more likely if John didn't like that. Like, he did not want to, he wanted to hide that, right? He wanted to get rid of it. And so that's the embarrassment. Like, John found that embarrassing. And I'm using John as not his actual name, but this is whoever the author, right?
The author, yeah.
Yeah. He didn't like it, so he was embarrassed by it. He didn't like it, so he got rid of it, right? That's the idea. So there, like, that's a legitimate argument. Like, the argument from embarrassment explains one thing, that the authors of John were embarrassed by this. However, the originator of the story, the Gospel of Mark, the author there, he was not embarrassed by it. So that's where it doesn't work, right? So the idea is that, like, no one would make it up, except when you read Mark, he makes it up clearly in ways that are really beneficial to Jesus. Like, he has John, the famous John the Baptist, declare Jesus his superior and his successor, right? Like that's obviously something you're going to make up. Like, that's so useful to make up. Now, it became embarrassing later, right? So you have an argument for the development of the doctrine, but it doesn't work for that was therefore historical, because Mark is clearly making it up, right? There's no prior evidence to Mark about this. And so that's the argument fails. But it fails because you can look at the structure of what's in Mark, and you can say, this is more likely if Mark is making it up than if it actually happened, right? But when you look at John, you could do the other way around. You could say him deleting it is more likely if he didn't like it than any other explanation. So the argument works one way or the other, but it doesn't get you to historicity. It doesn't get you to Jesus, is the problem.
O argumento do embarrassment, como é que é embarrassment em português, que o Scania falou?
Do embaraço.
Do embaraço, esse argumento, ele
constrangimento
não
também
se aplica, o constrangimento, exatamente. Esse constrangimento, ele não se aplica no John. O João claramente queria se livrar desse argumento. E é um argumento que ele não, aparentemente eles têm que ser ligados, porque um gospel fala uma coisa, um autor fala uma coisa, o outro autor fala outra, e claramente o João estava querendo de alguma forma se livrar desse argumento, com o João Batista e tudo mais, mas essa questão da metodologia, ele consegue apresentar claramente como que essa metodologia funciona para um lado, mas se usar para um outro sinótico, não vai funcionar. Então, é um argumento que não se encaixa em todos eles. É por isso que é pueril. É por isso que não se encaixa, é por isso que não funciona.
Faz um acréscimo nessa pergunta aí, já que ele falou do João Batista.
Antônio, you're going to add something for that, right?
Yeah. A gente vê na obra de Flávio Joséfo que o João Batista em Flávio Joséfo, ele está meio que negando aquela questão de que ele não batizava para a remissão de pecados. Isso pode evidenciar que ele foi uma interpolação?
O Flávio Joséfo, ele evidencia que... Pode repetir para mim, por favor?
No texto dele, ele fala que João não estava batizando para a remissão de pecados. Isso pode evidenciar que foi uma interpolação cristã tardia, acrescentando esse texto de João Batista na obra de Joséfo?
Okay, in Josephus' work, he said that John the Baptist, he wasn't actually given the baptism for
Remissão de pecado.
redemption of the saints. Of the saints.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, do you think that it's an interpolation, later interpolation?
I think that line is. So here's a good example of the methodology. So
aqui é bom exemplo de uma metodologia.
Yeah, if the whole Josephus wrote a big piece about John the Baptist, and if that was all fake, like if it was all fake, then there wouldn't be the need for that sentence. So it shows that Josephus wrote that whole passage about John the Baptist. A later Christian was worried about it, so he added the line to sort of fix it, to add that concern there. But that concern is of no concern to Josephus or his audience. It's only of concern. That line about, well, his baptism doesn't remit sins, that line was only relevant to Christian readers, right? So like whoever wrote that one sentence was a Christian. But that in turn proves that the rest of the material about John the Baptist was originally there, right? To bother them. So that shows like there was embarrassment. A later scribe fixed it. And we can show this by what's probable, like what's more or less probable. That's the thing, right? So that's an example of where you can use the method to find where things have been doctored and what the background to the story is. But of course, also Josephus never connects John the Baptist with Jesus either. So
he never connected, right? He never. So would you say that it's a really later Christian interpolation after all?
Yeah, though certainly everything about Jesus is in Josephus. And I've
everything about Jesus. Would you say it's interpolation
in Josephus? Yes. And I've written a lot about that.
Yeah, ele já pesquisou muito sobre isso. E as interpolações e os que tem sobre Josefa falando sobre Jesus e João Batista são todas interpolações. E ele leu bastante coisa sobre isso. E não faz sentido ter daquele tanto detalhe sobre João Batista no livro de Josefa, sendo que quem estava preocupado com isso era cristão, tentando provar aquela questão de crente querer prova. Então, essas são interpolações tardias que são colocadas, e ele pesquisou bastante sobre isso.
E são debates teológicos também mais tardios, né?
It's a theological debate, like later the theological debate about that too. Like it's not something relevant on that period of time. So,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's not relevant for them. It's just relevant for the later Christians that apparently they need evidence to prove their faith.
Yeah. And are happy to make it up. Yeah.
Ele falou que realmente é exatamente isso, e que eles ficam felizes de fazer isso tudo, né? Eles gostam de fazer isso.
As principais alegações que vemos para se propor a existência de um Jesus histórico é a questão da desmitologização da Bíblia. Ou seja, removem todos os elementos sobrenaturais e, em seguida, propõem que o restante que sobra pertence a um suposto Jesus real. Fora isso, vemos o uso de autores como Flávio Joséfo, Tácito, Plínio e Suetônio, que parecem tratar de um Jesus mítico e não de um Jesus judeu, analfabeto, apocalipsista ou revolucionário contra Roma, né? Porém, pela nossa leitura, vemos que as narrativas de Jesus estão sendo construídas em cima da Bíblia hebraica ou até de mitos gregos. Também temos estruturas narrativas artificiais e que não seguem uma ordem natural, como muito bem vemos explicado em seu livro. Nesse sentido, na sua visão, esses seriam os melhores argumentos para se sustentar a existência de um Jesus histórico? Se sim, quais são suas vulnerabilidades?
All right, so we're going to move on for the question number 3. Just one thing, I'm going to interrupt a little bit sometimes just to because I don't want to lose a thing that you're saying. It is really important for us. So
that's what I was wondering. Like, do you want me to pause at good points where?
Yes, please.
Let's do that.
It'll be awesome. Yeah. So question number 3, the primary arguments often used to support the existence of historical Jesus involve in the process of removing somehow all the supernatural elements from the Bible and then attributing the remains to the supposed real Jesus. Proponents also cite authors like Flavius Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny, Suetonius. But these sources seem to describe more kind of a mythical Jesus rather than a Jewish illiterate, apocalyptic, and revolutionary against Rome. From our perspective, the narrative of Jesus appeared to be based on the Hebrew Bible, of course, or even Greek myths. we also observe artificial narrative structures that don't follow the natural order, as you explain in your book, for example. Do you consider these sources, the authors that we mentioned, the strongest arguments that for existing of historical Jesus? If like, what are the vulnerability that these sources have?
Yeah, no, I do not.
Não mesmo.
Yeah, I think they're the worst sources that we have.
Ele acredita que é o pior, na verdade, a pior evidência que teria. Wow.
The best sources we have are the letters of Paul, and there's some disputed and what I say disputable passages in them. But the fact that you can dispute those passages means that that's at least closer to something that you can hang your hat on. If that makes a sense.
As melhores evidências que nós temos seriam as apóstolas paulinas que ainda também somente aqui estão atribuídas a ele. The Pauline's epistles, would you say that it dropped already to 4 or still on 7?
Well, 7. It's still the consensus,
7.
and I agree, is 7 authentics. One of them, Philemon, is a useless letter because it doesn't talk about the historical Jesus at all. Like, it's a different
Philemon
sentence.
is a useless.
Yeah, it's short. It's not useful for this debate, right? So,
yeah,
so there's only the 6 that matter for this.
Continua a mesma quantidade de 7 hoje em dia. Eles acreditam ainda que 7 são um bom número para manter que são realmente paulinas as epístolas. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and you were right. You're right to mention that there's evidence of things that are typical of fiction. So convenient plot structure, and implausible events, and the emulation of previous stories. So a lot of the stories about Jesus are based on stories about Moses, Elijah, even Homeric heroes. And you can show this.
Muitas histórias de Jesus são histórias que são baseadas em outras que a gente já viu, não é nada novo. Como Moisés, como Elijah, que é o Elias. Elijah, I think, is Elias em português. Então, realmente, são coisas que são muito implausíveis de ter acontecido e que aconteceram também com outros personagens. Yeah, go ahead.
Acrescenta nessa questão que ele trouxe das epístolas de Paulo, que a gente tem um problema, por exemplo, assim, essas 7 que são consideradas verdadeiras, como que a gente pode chegar num consenso de que de fato elas são verdadeiras se parece que tem anacronismo? Por exemplo, assim, em 1 Tessalonicenses 2:16, ele parece estar falando da destruição do templo judaico. Então, Paulo estaria depois de Paulo. Em Romanos 11 também. Qualquer coisa você vai traduzindo e me pergunta de novo.
Tá. About those 7 epistle that we can't say that is legitimate from Paul. Apparently, 1 Thessalonians 2, qual é o verso?
Right.
1 Tessalonicenses 2:16 e Romanos 11.
Yeah, 1 Thessalonians 2:16 and Romans 11. It looks like that Paul is talking about the destruction of the temple. So how can that's a question to add to your answer? Yeah. How can we really do not consider that after 70?
Yeah, so for Romans 11, I don't think that holds up. I think Paul uses
Romanos 11, ele não acha que é sobre
he uses a reference from the Bible, from Scripture, that I think some people mistake as referring to the destruction of the temple recently, but he's just picking that example to illustrate a point about whether the Jews will also be saved. The analogy is to Jews attacking each other, so it doesn't show evidence of the Romans destroying the Jewish religion, the Jewish temple.
You're talking about the Romans 11.
Right, so Romans 11 shows, I think that, in fact, it's conspicuous for its absence, a reference to the destruction of the temple cult. The fact that Paul doesn't address it in there is evidence that was written before. Now the other one, 1 Thessalonians 2, yeah, I think there's a whole interpolated passage in there. And you're right, chapter 2, verse 16 refers clearly, and there's a lot of apologists try to deny this and come up with convoluted other things it could mean, but there's really no other thing that could mean than the destruction of the temple. So the author of that line, and probably a few verses before it, cannot have been Paul. And we can also show this, that the author of 2 Thessalonians, which we know is a forgery, we agree, everybody agrees that's a forgery, except the most hardcore Christian apologists. 2 Thessalonians also does not appear to know about those verses in 1 Thessalonians, even though it highly emulates 1 Thessalonians. Like, so someone took 1 Thessalonians to make a forgery of 2 Thessalonians, but whoever did that, their version of 1 Thessalonians did not have those lines. It didn't have line 16 in chapter 2. So, and you can show this too, that the way that they're copying from the letter and they don't copy this. So that, I think, shows that chunk is definitely not written by Paul.
Literalmente essa parte de Tessalônica, 1 Tessalônica 2:16, 3, não sei, realmente, claramente não foi escrito por Paulo. Aquilo ali é tardio, aquilo ali é depois de 70, porque está justamente... E usa referências também, eles conseguem ver referências de 2 Tessalonicenses, que parece que o tipo de escrita é diferente, então mostra que essas tiveram múltiplos autores, então, de fato, aquele trecho de Tessalonicenses 2:16, aquilo ali é uma interpolação, aquilo ali não foi escrito por Paulo. Pode falar.
Pode perguntar ele, por gentileza. Se para essa afirmação que não foi Paulo, existe alguma evidência da crítica textual manuscritológica ou é apenas pela cultura de se datar Paulo antes de 70? Qual é, além desse pensamento?
Se tem variante textual, porque a gente não acha variante textual para essa passagem, né?
Mm-hmm. All right, so it's a really good question, actually, as Kenneth brought up, because apparently we have kind of a culture about we have to put Paul before 70. Doesn't matter. He has to be before 70. But do we have any critics about that specific passage of 2:16, 1 Thessalonians 2:16? Do we have any manuscript critics that really confirms that it's before or after 70? Because apparently we have to follow that. We have to put Paul before 70. But apparently, clearly, because of that passage, it shows that the author is after 70. So how can... A pergunta foi o quê? Qual é a crítica?
Qual é a evidência manuscritológica que se tem?
So what's the evidence? So what evidence we have about manuscript we have about that specific chunk?
Yeah, so it's debated in the field, and usually it's Christian apologists arguing that it's authentic, and everybody else arguing that it's not. So
you're saying the Christian apologists are saying they're authentic? Okay.
Yeah. So that's the debate. And the debate, like, there's been lots of books and articles written about it, right? So I've studied this quite a lot. A lot of arguments are made on both sides. But what you do is you compare the evidence of, for example, what verse 16 could possibly mean. You compare the oddity of the actual structural and content oddities of the preceding verses of verse 14 and 15 are also very uncharacteristic for Paul in a lot of ways. And so there's a variety of other pieces of evidence that you can show that this doesn't fit there. It doesn't belong. And that's the scholars who are arguing for this. That's their argument. And like I said, we could do a whole video just on that.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, the apologists are trying to come up with excuses to make all of those problems go away, so that the passage can somehow still have been written by Paul before the destruction of the Jewish temple. And so there's a whole debate about it. There's a lot of words spilled about it. And so you'd have to dive in to really sort it out.
All right, I'm going to translate that. Scania, tem um debate em aberto, não está nada decidido. As pessoas que defendem são cristãos, são teólogos cristãos que defendem e tentam fazer literalmente um malabarismo para tentar explicar aqueles problemas, porque é um problema. Esse trecho é um problema. E so the evidence we have, do we have any manuscript evidence?
No manuscript evidence. All of the evidence we have, even attestations of Marcion's version of the letter, all confirm that it was there. So we know it was in the text as of about 100 to 140 AD. Okay. So we know it was in the text by then, but we don't have any evidence prior to that to tell. So we have no earlier manuscripts.
Não temos nenhuma evidência de antes de 140 que aquilo ali que aquela manuscritos. E eles comparam os outros versículos também, como o 14 e o 15, e não parece característica de Paulo. Então, de fato, não há evidências de que é autêntico, e isso é um problema. Isso é um problema porque é um debate em aberto. É um debate que está em aberto e os apologistas estão tentando resolver esse problema fazendo dialogismo e tudo mais.
Ô Pedro, só para concluir essa parte aqui, essa teoria das 7 cartas autênticas, ela já está sendo mitigada de alguma maneira na academia? Ou permanece as 7 cartas? Mas há alguém que já diz que não tem 7 cartas, que só tem 4, ou que só tem 2?
About those 7 epistles that the academia say that it is legit. There is somebody in the academia saying that no, guys, we have to talk about that. It can be like less than that. There's some debate about those 7, or still
not so much. There have been some published scholars who've questioned them, but very few, and it's very definitely an overwhelming position that they're authentic, and I'm convinced that they're authentic.
The whole 7.
Yeah, they've been edited, though. They've been meddled with, and that's an issue. And I think a lot of mainstream scholars agree with that we don't have the original form that Paul wrote them in. So that becomes a problem, and some scholars want to sweep it under the rug, and others want to confront it head on. And so that's a debate going on right now. But their authenticity is not really in doubt.
Okay. Ele falou que a autenticidade em si não é uma questão que está em debate. Ele mesmo acredita que as 7 são verdadeiras, apesar de ter edição. E ele falou que até os apologistas cristãos acreditam que e concordam que tem edição, mas a maioria deles concordam que são as 7, e alguns apresentam problemáticas e que questionam as 7 cartas, mas ele mesmo acredita que as 7 são legítimas.
Vamos aqui para a próxima pergunta. Na pergunta 4, vemos na obra do apologista Justino de Roma que a comparação que ele faz de Jesus e os chamados filhos de Zeus, ele compara com Hermes, que é o Logos, né? Com Hércules, com Asclépio e até com os imperadores romanos. Ele diz que muitos de seus ensinos parecem com aquilo que encontramos nas obras de Platão, Menandro e outros filósofos gregos. No final, ele diz que tudo isso é culpa dos demônios, que sopraram nos ouvidos desses antigos autores essas semelhanças com Jesus. Na sua visão, esse arquétipo visto no mito de Jesus já existia em outros personagens mitológicos no mundo antigo? Se sim, quais são os melhores exemplos?
I really like that the question number 4. Let's jump in right on it. In the writing of the apologist Justin Martyr, he compares Jesus to like Hermes, Hercules, Asclepius, and even Roman emperors. Justin Martyr suggests that the Jesus teachings resemble ideas in works of Plato, Menander, and other Greek philosophers. He attributes these similarities to demons who supposedly influenced the ancient authors. Do you think these archetype that seen in the Jesus myth exist in any other mythological figures in ancient world? If yes, can you give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is kind of a giveaway. Like, he immediately says he has to scramble to explain. I don't know. He looks a lot like these other gods, so we have to come up with the devil predicted all of this and then told other people in the past. It's like a really convoluted time travel hypothesis, right? So you can translate that, and then I'll answer the rest.
Não, com certeza. São problemas que eles tiveram que apresentar, como tinha similaridade já naquela época, eles tiveram que demonizar. Então vamos colocar que foi demônio, porque aí a gente consegue se livrar disso e que aquilo ali não é verdade. Mas que de fato já existia já, e eles sabiam disso. All right? Wow. Go ahead. You can.
Yeah. So 2 things. I mean, one, this gets back to the Hercules point. Okay. And you'd mentioned earlier this idea of subtracting all the supernatural stuff, and then what you have left must be historical. You could do that with Hercules.
We can do that with Santa Claus.
Yeah, right. Would any historian accept that as a method? No, not at all. So no, that's not a legitimate approach. So start with that, and then I'll answer the actual question that was just asked right now.
Ele falou que essa ideia de retirar todas as mitologias e o que sobrar é o verdade, ele falou que se partir desse princípio a gente consegue aplicar isso para qualquer personagem. Então isso não pode ser um argumento válido para ser utilizado para defender o Jesus histórico. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and so the ones I actually analyzed some of the many of the examples that the stories of Jesus were emulating. I cover a lot of this in my book on the historicity of Jesus, and there are several, but the most significant ones that have a lot of similar features and a lot of similar stories is obviously Moses. So there's a lot of Moses going on. There's Elijah and Elisha is another example. And then on the Greek side, there's Odysseus and Dionysus, and Romulus. Those were the ones that a lot was borrowed from. And it's not that they just retold the stories. They got ideas from them and then told a new story about Jesus that sort of uses those ideas. And then Aesop is another one. So I find there's a lot of parallels between Jesus and Aesop. And that's a surprise, right? But Aesop is a countercultural trickster hero, and so Jesus is kind of depicted that way as well. So those are the ones that I think are the most common, and there's even more that are used as models.
Would you say Apollonia Theana? It is a good example too.
No. That, as far as we know, everything about him is post Gospels. So,
okay.
But we don't have any specific evidence that he was an influence. More likely, it's the other way around: Christianity influencing Apollonius of Tyana's legends.
Ok, alright. Então ele falou que no livro dele, The Historicity of Jesus, this one, ele justamente fala que ele apresenta vários exemplos de personagens que Jesus não praticamente... que é a questão da referência. A referência não é cópia. Referência se pega e você usa parte daquilo para emular. Então ele fala que Jesus emulou algum dos personagens. What do you want? You give an example that you compare Jesus to, what's the name of it?
Aeneas? I'm sorry, Aesop.
Aesop,
yes.
Ele falou que esse Aesop é um cara que é um anti-herói, na verdade, e ele conseguiu encontrar similaridades de Jesus com um anti-herói. E na verdade, Jesus, na verdade, é um herói, né? Então, ainda assim, ele conseguiu encontrar similaridades e também ele tem similaridades claras em Moisés, Eliseu, Elias. Então tem vários...
Yeah. The lives of Aesop are very similar to the Gospels in that we have different ones, and they have later ones copy verbatim from the earlier ones and change stuff, just like Matthew does to Mark. They're also anonymous, and they're completely fictional, and have a lot of similarities in terms of he's a countercultural hero. So the religious establishment goes after him, and he's downtrodden, he's lowly, and all of that kind of stuff. So the similarities are very interesting in that regard. So the gospel narratives really follow in the tradition of the Aesop lives of that. And so you find a lot of parallels between them.
Ele realmente encontrou paralelos muito, muito característicos do Aesop e Jesus, como a questão de ser perseguido pelo império e tudo mais. How dated is the Aesop before the Gospel?
So the lives of Aesop start pre-Christian, and then later redactions. So we're not really sure of the exact dates, but they span roughly about 200, I think, maybe 200 or 300 BC up to about 200 or 300 AD, because there's many of them.
There's many of them.
Yeah, it gets rewritten over and over again in over a long period of time.
É um personagem, Aesop é um personagem que foi escrito, que o mais antigo data de 300 a 200 anos antes de Cristo, e tem vários manuscritos que ele foi reescrito várias vezes, mas basicamente a mesma essência. E todos eles têm a similaridade com Jesus, então temos um personagem que se parece com Jesus, coisa de 200 ou 300 anos antes do próprio.
Inanna, it's a good example. Inanna myth.
Yeah, so the Inanna myth, I do talk about this in my book. We don't know if that myth was circulating at that time. However, it seems unlikely that it wasn't. And the reason is that, I don't know if people know this, but you can get this in Samuel Noah Kramer's book, History Begins at Sumer. He has a translation of it, at least in the English. I don't know if there's a Portuguese version, but...
Probably not.
Probably not, yeah. So the Inanna story is here, I'll just quickly go through it. Inanna decides that she's going to go to the underworld. She has some scheme, some plan, We don't know what it is because we're missing pieces of the text, but this is the part we have. She goes there. She ultimately is stripped naked and killed and then literally nailed up on a post. And then 3 days later, her servants come and feed her the food and water of life, and she rises from the dead and ascends to heaven and avenges herself on her enemies. Now, look, third day, crucifixion, resurrection, like this is, what are the odds? I mean, clearly this was a story, and we have this on clay tablets from the 3rd millennium BC, so it's definitely pre-Christian.
The millennium BC.
Right. We're talking 2000 BC-ish, like in that range. And so some historians will say, well, that's so long ago, we don't have any evidence that the myth was circulating 2,000 years later. But I think like that is evidence that it must have been, right? Like what are the odds that there be two completely unrelated stories like this that have no connection to each other? It just doesn't seem probable to me.
Like, okay, so it looks like the people are doing from 2,000 years apart. They are doing the same music. Like that's really like no, come on.
And we know her cult was worshipped at that time, so it was still 2,000 years later in the city of Tyre, even, which is, the Gospels have Jesus go there, right? And so the city of Tyre, that was their center of her cult there. We don't have any texts from them, but we know they were teaching it. What do you think they were teaching, right? Like what? Right. So that's how I take the Inanna reference. That's why.
Inanna é um bom exemplo, porque é um exemplo que está coisa datando de milênio antes de Cristo, e é um bom exemplo porque ela foi para o submundo e ela foi crucificada como Jesus, ela multiplicou comida, ela fez tudo, e também ressurgiu dos mortos. Então, ele falou, não temos evidência de que esse mito estava sendo espalhado na época de Jesus. Mas aí ele fala, mas peraí, pô, como é que pode? 1 milênio depois e ainda assim a mesma história, como que pode ser tão parecido? Mesmo que a gente não tenha evidências de que não estava sendo compartilhado naquele período.
É porque pode ter vindo através de outros mitos que recontaram essa história, né? Eles assimilaram, né?
Yeah, he said that thing about we don't have evidences about that being circulating throughout on the Jesus time, but it could be sources of other myths that were circulating at that time. So Inanna is just a source of it.
Also that, but also it could be the Inanna story was circulating. We lack almost all literature from then, so we don't know. Yeah. We can't actually say that it wasn't, and we can't even say what they were teaching, but we know they were teaching something. The Inanna cult was right. So we know that was a thing, right? So just because we don't have access to the books doesn't mean we can say that they weren't there. And that's why I think we have this argument for probability about it.
Não é porque não temos exatamente o livro que está mostrando que estava sendo circulado naquela época que é porque não tem. Claramente tem coincidências.
Pode ler, Oscar.
Está mutado, Scanner.
Ok, a 5.
Yeah,
é isso?
Question number 5.
Sim.
Dentro de um contexto histórico-cultural, Jesus seria um Messias aos moldes do messianismo dos tempos da revolta dos Macabeus e que inspirou inúmeros outros revolucionários posteriormente? O personagem Jesus se enquadra no arquétipo messiânico descrito na Bíblia hebraica ou seria o oposto da Bíblia hebraica? Ele se enquadra, o Jesus, nas profecias judaicas ou não se enquadra?
All right, question number 5. In a historical and cultural context, was Jesus seen as a Messiah similar to the Messianic during the time of Maccabean revolts, which has inspired many revolutionaries after all? And Jesus fit on the Messianic archetype described in the Hebrew Bible, or he's completely the opposite of it? Does he fulfill the Jewish prophecies in that?
It's hard to answer this because we can't answer it for the real guy. So if there was a Jesus, we don't really know anything about him. But what we can talk about is the fact that the gospel authors were trying very hard to make him conform to that. And of course they had a countercultural version. Theirs was not a violent Jesus. Now he's going to come back with his armies from heaven. But at first he's just a preacher, right? And so that is different. But we see examples in the Dead Sea Scrolls of this kind of messianic figure. So even that is not completely different from what was floating around. Like there were lots of different ideas about who the Messiah should be and how he should act, and Christianity does fit in that mold. But he was forced to fit it, right? Like the stories were made up to make him fit prophecies, and so on. There's no evidence that he actually did.
Ok. É uma pergunta um pouco difícil de responder, porque às vezes ele se encaixa e às vezes não se encaixa. Tem coisas que claramente são autores que conhecem a Bíblia hebraica tentando forçar um personagem naquele contexto. Mas, de fato, são atores que sabem da Bíblia hebraica e que estão criando um personagem ali, porque nós não temos nada de Jesus. Então, é uma questão difícil de responder. Estão forçando, mas
Ele não parece um Messias que é o oposto, um pacifista, ao invés de ser um revolucionário?
Yeah, so it doesn't look like that Jesus is the opposite of the Messiah in the Hebrew. It looks like.
So, but remember, the Christians preached, and even Paul preached, that Jesus is coming back, right? And the Gospels say he's coming back with armies, right? So that is the warrior Messiah. Like he still is the warrior Messiah. He just comes down and preaches the warnings. He says, "I'm warning you, I'm coming back," and then he dies and resurrects. And then the plan is he's going to come. Then he's going to come with the armies. So he actually isn't a pacifist Messiah. All they've done is that they've moved his militarism into the future at the apocalypse, and that also has precedent in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that also is a pre-Christian Jewish idea.
And would you say that just because I'm translating that in Portuguese what it said, I don't want to lose that, but is a Messiah is the same thing as a prophet? Like he could be a prophet instead of just a Messiah?
Yeah, like I said, there were a lot of different ideas of who the Messiah could be, and a lot of them overlapped. Like Messiah could be both a prophet and a warrior, and a redeemer figure, and so on, and a reformer. He could be a revolutionary. Like he could be all of these things at the same time. But because of that, you could actually create other messiahs, like ideas of a messiah that fit one of those molds more than the other. That was entirely compatible with the way things could happen back then and the way people were thinking and trying to solve their problems, the political problems of the moment. And so I do talk about this actually on the Historicity of Jesus, the idea of how the politics shapes the different types of messiahs people might conceive of. And I think that there's a variety, there is diversity, and Christianity fits in that diversity.
O cristianismo, como existiam vários movimentos messiânicos, são características diferentes para cada um deles, e como estava em aberto essa questão, os messias daquela época, cada um tinha suas características, e ele fala aí sobre isso no livro, que sim, Jesus pode se encaixar porque existiam vários tipos de messias. Então, como estava tendo revolta para tudo quanto é lado, essa questão estava aparecendo, e Jesus poderia se encaixar, mas isso só comprova que ele é só mais um dentre outros mitos.
I can add to that, though.
Yeah, please.
So there are scholars, like legit scholars, who argue that there was a historical Jesus, and he was an armed military guy, that he was a militant, he was, a revolutionary, and that the Gospels are whitewashing it, right? Like they're converting him, basically want to hide the fact that he was a military opponent of Rome. And Fernando Bermejo Rubio is one of the leading arguers for this view. It is still a small view, not a lot of scholars buy it, but it is considered a legitimate debate in the field, whether Jesus, the real Jesus, if there was one, whether he was actually a violent revolutionary or not.
Ele falou que tem alguns estudiosos que defendem a ideia de um Jesus revoltoso, mas que são poucos também, porque o próprio sinótico ele vai ter que refazer todos os gospels, todos os sinóticos para poder encaixar esse Jesus aí. Então, mas ele falou que de fato existem pessoas sérias que estão pesquisando para tentar encaixar, mas de fato o próprio evangelho vai contra essa ideia.
Eu tenho aqui o livro do Richard Husband.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah.
Ele fala que quando se diz, por exemplo, assim, dê a César o que é de César, ou ame seus inimigos, seria para o que o autor estava querendo dizer era para os judeus se submeterem a Roma, né, para pagarem os impostos. Isso daí faz sentido na visão dele?
It makes sense in your point of view that as a Richard Hosley, he defends that Jesus was giving instructions about give Caesar what Caesar's, love your enemies, love your enemies and everything. So what do you see about that? The Jesus about is kind of a pro-Rome.
Yeah, definitely the character of Jesus is pro-Rome. And I think that comes from
Definitivamente
Paul.
Jesus é pro-Roma.
And that comes from Paul. I have an article on my blog on...
you say it comes from Paul too, you say?
Yes. So, like Romans 13, Paul argues exactly that, right? Like that you should submit to the authorities, etc.
Romanos 13, Paulo argumenta.
Yeah. And so when Mark, the first gospel, is creating a story about Jesus, he's using Paul's letters actually as a model to build the story and to build out that particular character. And I do think this goes back to, it may go back prior to Paul, that might be part of the movement from its origin, but definitely in Paul's conception, he wants to create a pacifist movement that can, all sides can get along and will be peaceful, and that they can have their own kind of society underneath the oppression of Rome, and that it could survive. And all they have to do is not be violent, right? Like, so I think that there was a pressure to make that the case. And whether that came from Peter, whether that came from Jesus, those are questions we don't know. But there's definitely, from as far back as the records go, Christianity as a movement is trying to push against the violent militarism of the violent messianism.
Yeah, so, exatamente, o que ele está falando aqui em Romanos 13 é claramente, Paulo prega muito essa questão de que ele estava tentando harmonizar a galera viver, gente, vamos se pacificar, não vamos entrar em guerra. E, de uma certa forma, acaba tendo que defender Roma por conta disso, e que ele enxerga isso nas epístolas paulinas e tudo mais. Mas que, sim, claramente era uma questão de tentar harmonizar e tentar os revoltosos a se controlarem, tentar os revoltosos a não entrar em guerra contra Roma.
Wow.
Yeah. I have to say, so I have to stop and go make dinner for my wife and me.
No, of course, yeah.
But we got through 5 of the questions. If you want to have me on again and do an hour and do the other 5,
really? Okay.
You and I, Pedro, we should coordinate that and do it. I'd happily come on again and do a part 2.
So we're gonna do the part 2. Ele falou que ele tem que sair porque ele tem que fazer a comida para a esposa dele. Happy wife, happy life. So you gotta do that. Então ele falou que ele vai, porque ele falou que tem 5 perguntas ainda e ele quer responder. Mas como ele tem que sair, ele falou que vamos fazer a parte 2. Pedro, vou entrar em contato com você, a gente já marca a parte 2, que eu quero voltar aqui para responder essas outras 5.
Dr. Carey, thanks so much. It's a pleasure for me to stay here with you. I love your work. How can you see? So I try to divulgue your work here in Brazil, and it's a big pleasure for me to stay here with you. Thanks so much.
It's been great. It's been great for me too. I'm so glad to meet you guys, and I'm looking forward to coming on again.
All right, Dr. Richard, thank you very much, man. It was such a thrill and honor, and we'll keep in touch. Those 5s are waiting for you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Ciao, ciao.